Hey, welcome everyone to the Deeper Into the Woods podcast. This week we have Captain Wes Herman on the podcast, ready to talk about a recent trip to Colombia. Welcome back to the podcast, Wes.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Oh, yeah.
Exciting morning.
Yeah, you bet.
So exciting.
So, like I said, a recent trip to Colombia is kind of the reason why you're here, and we want to kind of know all about that. And we want to know some stories, what you learn in Colombia. But fun fact first, I'm probably totally killing your flow here, but you're actually born in Colombia, right?
Close.
Oh.
I was born in Canada.
Oh, yeah, Canada.
And then at 6 months old,
so close to Colombia.
Yeah, I was born in Canada, and it was just way too cold, so I decided to move to Colombia.
Yeah,
and it was wonderful. At 6 months old, I understood why people love that part of the world. So that's how it all started.
No
Exactly.
snow.
Right by the equator.
So it's like 80 degrees all the time?
You know, I wouldn't say 80. It's probably varying degrees from 65 to 85, but with humidity changing as well. And sun up to sundown year round is 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So it's
consistent,
very consistent, and kind of weird, you know. And if you're from the Pacific Northwest, and and we see a lot of weather changes. There's not a lot of weather change there.
Yeah.
Okay, so what kind of was the thought behind taking this trip to Colombia? I know it's kind of going back to your roots a little bit. You kind of grew up there as a little child, but why now? Like, why did you take the trip?
Yeah, well, we have a relationship there. We buy coffee from this specific region that we traveled to, and so Shay goes on an annual or semi-annual trip, every other year trip to that area, and it's a great time to really develop those deeper relationships with the farmers and see the practices that they're implementing. One of the interesting things that we learned was that they're 30% organic in this area, and by next year they'll be at 60% organic. So they're doing all the testing of the soils to figure out how to treat the soil and treat it effectively so that they don't have to use chemicals. And they're doing a fantastic job of this. So they're really leading a lot of these rural farming areas and doing some practices that are very advanced, including one of the farms we're at was featured in a UN magazine the very week we were there, talking about sustainability and practices that are really worthwhile in our industry.
Cool.
Yeah, so like one of the main reasons we go to, Colombia and a lot of origins that we visit is to partner with farmers who are in alignment with what we do here with the coffee and, our mission even of serving others, making a difference, all those things. So you met a lot of different farmers on the trip, right? You visited lots of different farms, and you're seeing sort of these connections to, why we partner with who we partner with. Exactly.
The partnerships and relationships that we forge there are incredible. Shay has been over a couple times now. This is probably his third trip into this area. And so to meet with these folks again and understand what they're doing and the advancements that they're making is worthwhile. Here in the U.S., we only see the coffee when it's green, right? We see the green beans. And so this is like going back from the green beans all the way back to the plant to see, how that process works. And we actually did a lot of processing there to learn hands-on, what to do, how to do it. And it's just a unique environment that is way different than any coffee experience we have here.
Yeah. And we've heard on previous podcasts, Shay talking about the different relationship aspects that we're really trying to get after with every coffee that we source. And I know that he has this special sort of intrinsic connection with Colombia, and he tries to put Colombia coffee in like every single blend we do. And he's talked about that as we kind of talked through all the different blends. Go back to that podcast and listen to that one for all that detail. But talking about Colombia, what's something that sets Colombia apart in your mind from the other origins that we source from?
Well, it's probably the number one marketed country. When you think about what they have done with Juan Valdez, and and that whole aspect. And it's really interesting that because there's Juan Valdez coffee shops, so they're as plentiful as Starbucks or probably more so in that area. So it's pretty unique in that way. Colombia is. What makes it stand out is probably the taste, right? I think that it's a coffee that you just gravitate towards. It's warm, it's friendly, it feels good. It doesn't have any, ridiculous spikes in one way or another in flavor notes. So it's just that really consistent, cup of coffee that you can count on. And we were served it in many different forms. The interesting thing about Colombia is that they don't drink a lot of their own coffee. They think of it as high quality, and they will forego the high quality coffee to get into a lesser quality coffee, even brought in from other countries, to drink so that they don't have to drink something that they would have sold and made money from.
Yeah, the priority is to sell the good stuff and drink the seconds or whatever, right?
And these are small farms, like when we were saying on these farms, we talked about that, these are 3.5 acre farms, in terms of acres that we know here in the U.S. The difference is that area, when we see farms here, we think of flat land, right? And we count that. These are hillsides with tons of elevation change. Excuse me. The first day that we were there, we hiked 7 miles and 2,000 feet of elevation just to get to the best coffee. So it's really unique. And to see the how things are manually done, in old-fashioned ways is just incredible.
Yeah, there's no tractors, right? It's like
probably it's steep.
Mules and and it's a hillside. You can't drive a tractor sideways on a hill,
No.
So everything's by hand. They pick by hand, sort by hand, right?
It's milled.
Yep.
Mostly by
Absolutely.
hand.
There's a mill there that will do the various processes, and every single one of these little farms has a mill. So they're doing the processing, and then there's collective areas where they process together just because it's for speed and efficiency. But when you're talking about 3 to 3.5 acres, this is a manageable crop, and these farmers, they make their livelihood off of that one crop.
Yeah. So we talk about elevation, and there are specific sort of elevation ranges where coffee is grown, right? And there's like the sweet spot. Where is that?
It varies per country, and it varies by the region in the country. And so, whereas we're in Brazil, it's much flatter. In this area that we were in, plus or minus, we're around 6,000 feet of elevation. And so, it's not like you're going to get, terrible coffee at 4,000 or, something that is, really exotic beyond 6,000. The difference is that you can actually harvest and plant crops that actually work at those elevations. When you get higher up, your yield is less. And so that's what makes the difference into why they grow in these regions.
That's you just be out of breath all the time trying to harvest coffee
hiking 6,000 feet.
10,000 feet.
And we were out of breath. We learned quickly that elevation makes a big difference in how thin the air is. And so we learned a lot because we had mistakenly not brought water. And so we hiked that entire day, 7 miles, 2,000 feet of elevation with no water. And it's not like these are ridiculous conditions. We were going to die. It was just really interesting.
You could have.
Yeah, my age.
You're like 60 something, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Man, you could have died out there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I think that for those of us maybe who haven't traveled in some of these sort of countries, gone to an origin where they grow coffee, explain a little bit about like your travel there, how you got there, how you travel to these farms, and then maybe what it was like to like visit the farms, the hospitality side of these families obviously welcoming you into their, probably their homes and
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
And, you know, our goal would be to put a face to these people, right? To help you understand exactly who these people are. You know, we say farmers in a generic sense, but, you know, like even, can we take some steps down even further? So the travel to get there is really interesting because coming from the Pacific Northwest, you've got to go east and then south. So first it was a 5-hour flight to Toronto, and then from Toronto it was 7 hours to Bogota, Colombia, and then it was the next day a 1-hour flight and a 6-hour drive, you know, up mountains. You know, these are not roads that you would encounter anywhere around here unless you went off road.
Yeah.
And so then the next day it was a 2-hour Jeep ride up some severe mountain roads, and then it was the hiking. But you know, to get to that first farm and to be greeted by the farmers because they're genuinely excited to make a connection with the eventual users of that coffee. And so they always put out a big spread of food, whether they served us breakfast, lunch, dinner. That was really a key part of the hospitality. And these people are working diligently to make the most of their farm. So they're growing other crops as well. And they're serving us this food and amazing fruit because Colombia has just some exotic fruit that is not only incredible, it's enormous. Because it grows big. One of the things we learned that was really fascinating is that bananas have a 21 day, I can't remember. I think it's 21 days, 21 day cycle. So every 21 days, there's a new crop of bananas ready to pick, and that happens year round.
That's crazy.
So, you know, that's
why there's plentiful amounts of bananas everywhere.
Exactly. That's why you get down, you know, right to the equator and you see these kind of things that are unique because we don't see that kind of thing in crops here. But back to hospitality, you know, also on that first day, we had a 9-year-old girl who was doing pour-overs and serving those to the group that was there. And the group that was there was probably about a dozen of us. And so just with a smile on her face, understanding exactly how to do things, you know, they've got a little scale. You know, this is detailed stuff. And it was just really cool. I've got a picture that of this girl, and she was amazing, you know, and she would do well in hospitality anywhere in America. But, you know, it's like that genuine experience when you're in the backwoods on a farm and somebody's serving you in this way. I mean, it just feels like great hospitality.
Cool. Yeah. So they really embody like a lot of the elements of our own culture here. And, you know, people are people wherever you're at, you know, and that's kind of the cool part about traveling across the world. You kind of see how small the world is all in the same, you know, you travel that hours and hours and hours, but then you kind of get to this human level again, where it's like, these are people, and these are the people that are producing the coffee that we're enjoying back in the United States. And it's just kind of a cool perspective that it gives you when you're drinking coffee here, because I think so easily we can be kind of unaware of that, or just take it for granted, you know, another cup of coffee, another day, another coffee, you know, or whatever, and not really think about the people and the hands that have really touched that and made it possible for that bean to be, you know, brewed and roasted and brewed and all that. Yeah. So it's just kind of a crazy perspective to think about.
Totally. Coffee is a unique product for that reason, of how much goes into it even before it even arrives in our hands at the green bean. You kind of touched on that. Back to, the farmers tilling the soil, prepping the soil, planting these trees, even waiting then years for trees to produce. And then each tree is only producing 1 pound to 2 pounds of coffee or cherries per year. They're hand picking those, processing them all, sorting them all by hand. Like, there's so much that goes into it. And then we get it in the green state. We roast it. Then it goes to the barista. Then the barista's brewing the cup. And you're right, we can just take advantage of that. It's just another day, another cup of coffee. We're just drinking the coffee. But really to stop and think about that whole process of what it takes to get to the point where you're drinking your cup of coffee.
Yeah, and think about when you buy a 1 pound bag of coffee, right? Like, that's a really good, like you've just bought half of one tree's whole production for a whole year.
Right.
Like you just bought half a tree's worth of coffee. Like that's crazy. And to think about like it's just a bag of coffee.
Yeah.
So it's just cool perspective to just know that when you're enjoying your next cup of coffee, like there's so much to enjoy beyond just the taste and beyond that, and like really be grateful and thankful for what it is, because it's really amazing.
It'd be
when
fun
you
to
think about it.
It'd be fun to, on a 3-acre farm, count how many trees and know how many bags of coffee is going to be sold. Pounds of coffee are going to be sold out of that
From that farm.
Yeah, it's pretty minimal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Right.
not a lot.
Yeah.
No, for sure. Well, and we talk about processing. Processing is all about fermenting. All the beans all the cherries ferment. So coffee is in a cherry. That cherry outside the mucilage, all that has to come off. And but there's a process of that, and there's a fermenting process that gives you some of the flavor that's in the coffee. So we're seeing new things like carbonic maceration, which is a new process from fermenting the cherries without any air, so that the fermenting process actually starts on the inside of the bean and works its way out. So that was an interesting thing, to be on a farm and sorting cherries, picking cherries, putting them in bins, and then going through the process of making sure that there was no oxygen in these bins. And then they seal them up. They let them sit.
Replacing oxygen with carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide, yep.
Yeah.
And then the carbon dioxide is sitting there for a number of hours, maybe 40 hours, at the maximum, to get this exact scientific fermenting that actually works. And so it's just a new things that they're doing, and it's just be fun. It's fun to be there, and you think of it primitive, but then you think, okay, well, they're doing things that are cutting edge and changing and new processes. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. So there's some cool stories about things that some of the farmers are doing in their communities in the areas where you were. We've featured a coffee before from Planadas, and there's an association there called Sopep. So we talk a little bit about that and what you learned about that while you were there.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. This is an organization that has about 200 farms, and they farm a few different things, including cacao, but they're predominantly in coffee, and that's where they are doing a lot of their work. So they've created a school that they're teaching kids at a very early age and certifying them as Q graders. And like things that not a whole lot of people do here, but they're saying, you know what, if we can do this and train these kids in such a way, they will have either some really valuable assets to bring to the community, or they could travel anywhere in the world and be an expert in what they're doing. So this entire organization is being built on a piece of land in this tiny town, and they're doing all the finest things, from education to creating an area where the wives of the farmers are creating other products and selling them in the market and finding ways to make this all work. So that organization in and of itself, 200 farms, they've got greenhouses there, they're drying coffee, they're testing coffee, and then that's where they're developing all the organic fertilizers for the farms. And to go through this and see the science behind that and see how they're doing this is remarkable. Because you'd think that we're in a high-level place in the United States, and here we are on a farm, and they're doing all the scientific ways and methods to test the soil and actually feed the nutrients to the soil on the exact farm to get the maximum yield.
That's so cool.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. So Sopep also have sort of changed their whole community with what they've done, because this was an area that had some hardship, right, and some hard times of what was going on there.
Yeah, from the guerrillas that would take people hostage for ransom. Those things are now by the wayside, and they're helping these people re-enter society, and the guerrillas. So they're working with them, which is amazing. But yeah, the aspects of all the new things that are happening in the town. When I got there, there was a little motel that we stayed at, and they said, "Oh yeah, this is a new motel." Well, it's happens to be probably the only motel. You know, there might be another couple of kind of shoddy looking places. This is actually a very nice place, minus the fact they have no hot water. That's just standard procedure. And so this cool little motel, and then 2 newer restaurants that were actually good. You know, things like that you felt like, okay, they get it, they understand. And so in this town, there's a lot of commerce happening, and people that are doing things because of the energy of the coffee business that's happening. But they're actually going in and paving streets and doing things to elevate the level of sophistication of the town and just make it much more functional.
So there's some energy around this area, right? A lot of energy, cool things happening. People are feeling empowered and that they can do more, which is really cool. It's a great partnership to have, and it's good to hear the stories of actually, firsthand coming out of there. Sometimes you hear little things, here and there, but you've actually seen it and been there, and you get the feeling from the people that everything's sort of looking up.
Yeah, and even downtown in this little town, they've got a warehouse and a little cupping center. And I mean, when we say little, both those are little, and it's so primitive the way that they're doing things. But they're building a new building on the campus where they're doing all the education, and that new building will house all the warehousing of coffee, as well as the cupping rooms and things like that.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you talk about like an economy that is able to thrive now after sort of decades of war-torn, just everything kind of dilapidated.
Kind of depressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, depressed, but it's also these people are resilient people, but they're simple.
They're still living.
The living is simple, but they're finally getting it. They're coming out of poverty, and we went and visited some even smaller communities where they're very it's poverty. I mean, poverty just like you would imagine, and but the coffee industry is changing all that for these farmers. So they're banding together and doing some significant things.
That's really cool.
That's cool. And that's kind of where we come in, right? As purchasers of coffee and as people who are able to, operate a business. The business doesn't just bless people around here. It blesses people in Colombia or Brazil or wherever that, they are fully reliant on their products selling to coffee shops and to roasters, right? In order to make all of those economical things happen for the community, right? So it's just such a key factor that people are buying the coffee. That's great coffee, yes, but it's also life-giving resource for a whole community. And that's what Sopep is all about.
Yeah.
And if you're an employee of the Woods Coffee and you're listening to this podcast, you should feel good about this.
Absolutely.
Because you're understanding a little bit more about where this coffee is coming from and where it connects all the way back to. So that when you're talking about coffee and explaining things to our guests, it's all about the education of where does coffee come from and what does it do, rather than just say, I don't know. Maybe you can educate yourself and learn something even from this podcast that is meaningful.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, and we're always learning. And that's kind of the reason why you guys went on this trip, was to learn, is to be firsthand, shake the hands of the people, be able to tell the stories so that we can actually know what the impact is and share those stories, and that's super cool.
Yeah, I look forward to going back because it's worth the effort to get there, and it is an effort. I mean, it's a lot of work, but very rewarding in terms of learning. And then connecting with these people and creating those relationships that should last a long time.
Yeah, cool. I think in light of relationships and making a difference in not only our kind of close-knit communities here in the Pacific Northwest, but really understanding that there's such a need beyond here, and we're able to meet those needs and make a difference globally, not just make a difference in our own community. And that's just something that obviously is part of our mission and it's part of who we are at Woods Coffee. And I'm excited to be a part of that. I didn't get to go to Colombia, but I can be a part of the mission in the store, you know, and sharing the story and being able to just enjoy the coffee in a different way, if nothing else, you know. And so, thank you for sharing that. I think it's something that's going to be more beneficial than we could possibly know right now, you know. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One layer at a time.
Yeah, and you bet. One place at a time. And so now, I mean, what's next on the agenda for big trips around the world? I know Shay's got a couple planned.
Shay typically now is going on 2 to 3 trips per year, and then he goes to different regions every other year. And so he's going to everywhere that we buy coffee, forming relationships. So that way our hope is to be 100% traceable relationship coffee in the next year or two, I think is going to be the timeline. And we're almost there right now. So I think that he has some trips planned this year, and he's hoping to create a couple more relationships where then we will have 100% traceable relationship coffee with all our coffees and all our blends.
Yeah, which means that we know exactly where the coffee's coming from. We know that those farmers are being treated fairly, and the prices are fair, and everything is as it should be. And so that's us taking the step to make sure that's actually happening, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Because you can't really rely on fair trade or other things. Those are great, but we're going a step further and saying we're going to make these relationships our own. And Shay's doing great work, and he's already more than halfway there. More than half of our coffees are 100% traceable, and so it's just really cool. We're getting there, and it's hopefully going to be something that I've never heard of that before, and so it's something that's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're even with one of our current blends that has 5 varieties of coffee in it, and every single one of them is traceable. So we know exactly where that all came from.
Maybe it should be called T5, Traceable 5.
Yeah. I like
There we go.
There's some marketing. Anyways, man, I think, do you have any other stories that you just are dying to share? Because otherwise I'm going to cut this off.
Really? We're
going to just, we're going to stop.
You know, I've shared so many stories about this trip with my family, and you guys being part of the family, you've probably heard them all.
Yeah.
You know, some of the fun things, you know, from, you know, getting stopped in a car where there were 6 of us in a vehicle, and the military pulling you out and frisking you. You know, that's unique, right?
Just an average day.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, there's the mountain roads. You know, traveling up. You know, in these Russian-made Jeeps.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that was just way cool.
That you wish you could get your hands on.
Exactly, but you can't. But we tried. But you know, that's the kind of stuff where you just, you know, builds that long-lasting memory of things. And you're in these roads. I mean, where you're downshifting, upshifting, and moving around, and just this whole thing, you're getting rocked from side to side, traveling up these mountain roads.
Yeah, you showed us some pictures of that. Maybe we'll throw some pictures up as we're talking. But so you're talking about these Jeeps that are kind of winding up these mountain roads. It's not just like, hey, you got 4 people in a Jeep. This is like, you got like 10 people packed in this Jeep, all like monkey cage. Like everyone's just sort of hanging on however they can, right?
And then you're just surrounded by this natural beauty of these trees that are just enormous.
Yeah.
When we hear about shade-grown coffee, you know, practically all this coffee is shade-grown because you're on a mountainside. You've got these canopy trees that are just huge. I mean, you can't even fathom how big they are. And they, you know, the shadow from these things, you know, covers acres and acres and covers up multiple farms. So, you know, that's those are the things that you know, people draw a line. You know, say, well, I want it to be fair trade. I want it to be shade grown. I want it to be, you know, this, and this. Well, all those things exist. You know, and so to be there and see it all is very natural, and it's natural the way they're doing it. So it's not like they're saying, okay, well, we got to put this farm in over here, so let's plant some trees and make sure we create some shade. You know, this is just part of the gig, right? Yeah. There's trees all over these mountainsides, and they've carved in these areas to put the coffee in, and so it's just all very natural, and it's a beautiful, beautiful scene to see.
Did you eat any crazy exotic fun foods?
I tried to stay away from the exotic fun foods.
You wanted to live to tell about it?
right. Shay got it a little bit into that and ended up getting sick for a number of days. And talk about hospitality. Shay got violently ill, and when we arrived at one of the farms, he just stayed at that farm until the end of the day. And they actually just said, "Here, please use our bed right here, and rest all day," which he did. And that's the level of care. It's just it feels good.
Do you think maybe he knew that you were going to be hiking like for 8 hours that day?
Oh, that could be. Yeah.
He just kind of said, "I'll stay here
I
on
need
this
a
bed."
nap.
The truth comes out.
Yeah, I think he's just smart. He's done this before.
Hey, one last thing I'd like to say is that we look for areas that we can impact these communities. And we're working right now on coming up with a program that will actually make a difference in their community by giving them money to build bridges that allow their kids to travel safely across all these various streams that they have to go across. And currently, they're walking across 2 round bamboo pipes that look like it's really shoddy. And so kids fall, they get hurt all the time, and so they're starting to build bridges that are substantial, and they can build these things in a day with concrete and steel because they actually have people who have left the communities, gone getting their education, come back as engineers, engineered these things to work. And so we'd really like to partner with them to help them in this community from the money that we make from the product that they supply us.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
super cool.
it's really
Pour
cool.
it back into the community even further.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah,
Such
it's
a
really
tangible, small little need. Perfect. I love it. Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
I just love hearing the stories. I think it's super fun, and hopefully it was energizing. Somewhat inspiring for our staff and others who are listening. But hey, I do want to thank you for making it this far in the podcast. I appreciate that. We don't take that for granted. Thanks for making it this far. I do ask that you would subscribe to the podcast so that you know when the next ones are coming out. And then if you could rate it, review it, and give it that big 5-star review because you loved it. You did. And that would help us out too. So anyways, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Wes. We're out of here.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.